Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast, Our New Narrative, and today is June 30th. And if you're here for the first time, welcome. And if you're back and you haven't done the following, please do like, share, and subscribe. Today, I want to present to you guys, a hero of mine, and I think of most liberty-loving people, Mr. Thomas Sowell, and I have to give a warning. You are about to witness a beatdown of a liberal-leaning Caucasian American woman. It's tragic. It's that accident on the highway. You can't help but look at it. It's sad. It's sad. But this video is from a TV show that used to be on called Firing Line, and although I may look old enough to have watched this when it was running live, technically I was around, but I definitely was not interested in the subject matter. But I'm gonna try and keep this video as brief as I can. I'll interject and give my 2 cents when I can, but this is about a half hour worth of this video. And I'll be talking with, periodically with them. So we're about to get started here. Please like, share, subscribe, and let me see, share my screen here. And here we go.
Okay, but nevertheless, certain significant differences remain.
Major differences, and I don't want to be optimistic, because if you're poor for reason X rather than for reason Y, that is no enormous consolation. I mean, that will not impress the landlord or the people at the supermarket. The fact is, they want to know how much money do you have, and you want to know how much money you're going to get too. So that these are major differences, and things need to be done about them. Unfortunately, politics involves telling people what they want to hear. And what people want to hear is that a certain kind of villainy can explain almost all of it.
Point number 1, politics. Telling people what they want to hear. And people make a great career out of being a politician. I'm sure you all know that. Some of you who may end up watching this video may be a politician. Hopefully you learn something. And I've stated this plenty of times, and I'm going to keep stating it. The key to politics post-Civil War, according to President Andrew Johnson and Montgomery Blair, his Postmaster General, the key to politics was no longer slavery. So the Democratic Party, I'm not here to, poo-poo the Democratic Party. You do that on your own. But the leader of the Democratic Party at the time concluded that, hey, we can't gain votes over the issue of slavery. The Democrats, the Confederates, they obviously were pro-slavery, so that's what they campaigned on. After the Civil War, couldn't do it no more. So what they concluded was, well, we can get votes by making everything about race. So this happened in 1865, 66, and you can see going from post-Civil War through Reconstruction, Jim Crow law, welfare state, modern day. Left leans towards race in all their politics. I digress. Let me let the man speak.
Now, there's no such thing as a lack of villainy among human beings. Anytime you take any large group of people, you have an almost inexhaustible source of sins. And if you want to look into all those sins, you can go on forever looking into them. The question is whether those sins explain the numbers you're talking about.
All right, let's grant that they don't. Mm-hmm. And go on to say, what is it that does account for them? Because we've eliminated genetic inclinations, we've eliminated invidious social factors, so we're left with what? For instance, region, where you come from, right?
Region makes a big difference.
Yeah, okay.
People who come from the South tend to have lower incomes, whether they're black or white.
Okay, let's say then
history.
We're talking about people in the same region.
There would still be a difference. History would be one big one.
History, what do you mean by history?
All right.
The history of the race, or the history of the personal history of when they got here, or what?
The history of the group in the United States. Mm-hmm. That, for example, the Jews who came here with all sorts of urban skills, clothing industries,
garment workers.
Yes, that sort of thing. The Germans came here with all sorts of skill and beer making, piano making, machinery kinds of things. Blacks, of course, emerging from slavery had enormous disadvantages, even as compared to people emerging from slavery in other parts of the Western Hemisphere. Because for one thing, in the United States, blacks were not allowed to have any responsibility under slavery. That one of the key ways of holding blacks in slavery at low cost was to keep the people dependent as much as possible. Now, people tried to do that in other parts of the Western Hemisphere. It wasn't as possible, say, in the West Indies, because there weren't enough whites, for example, in the West Indies to matter. So if blacks were going to be fed in the West Indies, they had to be fed by growing their own food.
Like Angola and like the Portuguese colonies compared to, say, South Africa.
Yes. And so therefore the blacks, say, in the West Indies had all sorts of experience growing their own food, selling the surplus in the market, and in fact being responsible for budgeting what they had. Blacks in the United States were deliberately kept from having that. Dependence was seen as the key to holding the slaves down. It's ironic that that same principle comes up in the welfare state 100 years later.
Bam! Man, come on. Two things here. I have to credit Dr. Thomas Sowell with this phrase: obtain skills other people are willing to pay for, which I believe he, and I don't know this, but he sounds very Booker T. Washington to me. And he was advocating the same thing. So first and foremost, in a market society, free market, which is debatable, whether or not America is still a free market society is debatable. But in this society, in this country, probably first and foremost, the most important thing you can do is obtain skills other people will pay for. That's one. Two, he shows the correlation between the welfare state and the form of slavery practiced in America. Total dependence on the slave in America versus a form of independence of the slaves in the Caribbean. And today, that, the roots of independence, you can see its tree, so to speak, in America today, because Black Caribbeans per capita are some of the richest people in America. Go look it up. Okay, so let him keep going.
Well, I was going to ask you that. You've anticipated me. To what extent do you find that then that the welfare state is trying to preserve an ethos which precisely, I understand you to say, we need to liberate ourselves from?
Yes, the politics really involves getting people to vote for you, and people vote for you when they think that they can depend on you, when they are dependent on you.
So why are Black people voting? Well, I'm going to go out on a limb and fall off of it if I say the majority of Black people are voting because they're interested in what politicians can do to help them start a business, help them own a home, help them get a better education. No, the majority of Black folks today, as evidenced by 80 or 90% of the Black community voting for the Democratic Party, they're voting for a protector. They want someone to protect them from a perceived racist. If you take racism out of the equation, what do you have left? You have your own personal interest as a person, a father, a mother, a homeowner, a businessman or a woman, an employee, right? But basically the Democratic Party, and I'm not here to poo-poo them, you can vote for whoever you want to. I'm just calling it as I see it. They're just running a protection racket, but let's let them keep going.
To the extent that people become self-reliant and can feel they're perfectly capable of taking care of themselves, to that extent, do you lose your hold on their votes?
Just let that sink in.
That's kind of a harsh generality, isn't it? Because a lot of people who really are philanthropically minded are in favor of the kind of thing that is generally understood as charitable intercession, isn't it?
Yes, there are people who are professional politicians who simply look at the bottom line and where the votes go. There are other people who sincerely believe that if they will hand out things here and there, that this will in fact benefit people. Again, looking at
your point is it doesn't.
It doesn't. I haven't been able to find a single country in the world where the policies that are being advocated for blacks in the United States have lifted any people out of poverty. I've seen many examples around the world of people who began in poverty and ended in affluence. Not one of them has followed any pattern at all like what is being advocated for blacks in the United States.
Now, this was recorded in 1981. This is 2020, June 30th.
Many groups have remained in poverty for a very long time, trying to follow those patterns.
These sort of permanent indigent classes.
That's right. Within the blacks, there's a very diverse movement, though. On the one hand, you have blacks who are getting more education, who are going to college and so on. Their incomes are rising, not only absolutely, but relative to that of whites of the same description. It's those blacks who have not had, say, 9 years of schooling, who have not had 6 years of experience in the job market. Their incomes are declining relative to the incomes of incomes of whites. If over the very same span of time, so it can't be a matter of the business cycle or something like that, is that those blacks who have the advantages relative to others have now still more advantages. But those who had the very difficult poverty to deal with, that is becoming more difficult. A higher percentage of all black income is going to the top 20% of blacks over time.
Well, do I understand you to say that the government has exacerbated the plight of these poor blacks?
Yes.
How?
A number of ways. One, they've made it difficult to get jobs, to get started in the job market. Minimum wage law would be one of those things, but only one. The terrible schooling would be a major factor. That if you're going to turn out kids who are 40% functionally illiterate upon graduation from high school, then you're going to have very serious problems in the job market.
And the government is responsible for that?
The government runs the schools. Yes. State as well as federal. They're doing many things to make it much tougher for the person at the bottom to get started. And they're also making it less necessary to get started by having various subsidy programs, food stamps, welfare, and so on, which reduce the difference between working and not working. So that the general tendency of what they're doing is to make it harder to rise. But of course, if you're lucky enough to have started to rise before these programs began, then you're in great shape.
I'm gonna try and be brief here. So when I was growing up, so I'm a part of that class or generation that he's talking about, 40% graduate illiterate. Well, I went on beyond high school, college, got a professional law degree. Still can't spell, thank God for spell check. But when people talk about the disincentive to work, such as welfare and food stamps and stuff like that, I think a lot of people, that turns a lot of people off instantly, because you don't want to be a part of that group of people that say, just let them starve. But just take a second and think about the following. Before there was a food stamp program, before there was unemployment insurance or Social Security, there was America, right? And so a lot of the poor were taken care of. They were taken care of via private organizations, charities, churches, things like that. The difference is now you are forced to take care of people you don't know, right? So you earn a wage, you make $20 an hour, some of that comes out of your taxes, and it goes somewhere to feed somebody who's currently in a predicament, right? Now that person may be in that predicament for a year, hard times, they bounce back, like the My Pillow guy. He was destitute. I don't own a pillow. I can care less about his pillow, but I like his story, right? He was poor and destitute, I believe he was on crack, whatever, but that didn't define his life. He needed some help at a certain point in his life, and now he's relatively wealthy. Now, what happens in 4 years if, the pillow business goes out of business and he's poor and destitute again? So being poor isn't a permanent, identifier. You may be poor one year, rich the next. With that said, once you make a law that mandates you know, a certain percentage of your income goes to people you don't know forever, I kind of feel a certain way about that. Now, I'm not one to want a whole bunch of poor people as soon as I don't want to interact with a whole bunch of homeless people, I should say, when I step outside of my house. But before, you know, the income tax, Social Security tax, people who found themselves in a less desirous position, there were ways they were taken care of. Family first and foremost, instead of government first and foremost, then the charity of the community as a whole. So there's ways to get it done. I digress. Here we go.
You point out in your book that one of the popular misconceptions is that the black families were headed by women as the result of of sundering families during the slave owning era. You say that's incorrect, that traditionally there was a mother and a father in situ where black families existed. Then you make the following statement: the current large and rising numbers of female-headed families among blacks is a modern phenomenon stemming from the era of the welfare state, when the government began to subsidize desertion and teenage pregnancy.
Yes.
In what way is the government subsidizing teenage pregnancy?
Oh, the AFDC program.
You're concluding that there would be less of that pregnancy if there were less of that program?
I'm saying that historically there was a lot less of it before there were such programs in general. I'm citing.
Now, again, some people who are very sensitive may, you know, turn him off right here, Thomas Sowell, by saying, "Oh, he just don't care. He's too conservative, blah, blah, blah." I think, as he pointed out, before these programs came about, you had less teenage pregnancy, right? And I believe the reason you had less teenage pregnancy was because you didn't have the insurance of federal funds to help you, you know, can I say eliminate a bad decision? I hate to say it like that, but put yourself, I hate to say I'll put myself in a woman's position, but let's say all things being equal, there's no nefarious actor involved here at all. So you're 16 years old, you fall in love with some football player, right? And y'all doing stuff the Bible say you're not supposed to do until you get married. Then, whoop, here comes little Johnny Jr. Now you got to go out and get a job. Both of y'all at this point, right? So that's kind of how things were in general. Making generalities, always exceptions, right? But once you put in that insurance of, okay, if me and Johnny are in relations and something happens and we don't want the consequences, we can go out and eliminate that consequence. Now, I'm far from being, you know, on the right religious side of things, right? But I want to point out that if the insurance wasn't there, Mary and Johnny would likely be more careful in the decisions they make, right? Knowing that, hey, having sex a lot tends to produce people. And if we continue to have sex a lot, we might end up producing a person. So at a minimum, maybe Mary will be more, shall I say, discerning in who she decides to have sex with, because she may end up not only with a little junior, but stuck with this guy in her life for the rest of his life or her life. And on the flip side of that, Johnny, the football player, may be a little bit more discerning as well, because he may end up being stuck with that girl, Mary, for the rest of his life, along with a kid. So just having that insurance policy there affects the way some people think. Now, in the case of, you know, incest, rape, and all that stuff, of course, you want to have some type of insurance for situations like that. But I personally don't believe that my tax dollars, I'm not talking about religion at all. I'm just saying my tax dollars shouldn't supplement, Mary and Johnny's good time on Friday night. That's all I'm saying.
There, for example, a study by Herbert Gutman, which took more than a decade, I believe. Again, what's striking to me is how long people repeated the statement that the female-headed black family was a legacy of slavery without ever bringing forth a single piece of evidence. Gutman spent more than 10 years looking into this, came up with exactly the opposite conclusion, that it was rare, particularly for teenage black women, to have children with no man in the house through the period that he covered, which is up to 1925. That those black women who had no husband typically were either widows or deserted or what have you. They were not teenage girls in most cases. I think in one period, 3% of the black families were headed by teenage girls.
And that figure is now over 50%.
I don't know what the teenage girl percentage is, but it's an awful lot. It's an awful lot higher than that.
Yeah. Well, Doctor, let's hear from our examiner. We have with us Mrs. Harriet Pilpel, who's well known to this viewers of this program. Mrs.
So for y'all, here's your warning. Look away. Look away. Ms. Pilpel, she about to get it.
Pilpel is an attorney with Greenbaum, Wolf and Ernst, a graduate of Vassar and of the Columbia Law School, and very active in a number of liberal and feminist movements.
So basically, she's what people of today call privileged.
Ms. Pilpel.
I would like to ask both of you, if I may, the same question. Both of you seem agreed that in the 1950s, Harvard and Yale excluded blacks and Jews and were
30s. Yeah.
Excluded blacks and Jews. And in fact, in another program, Bill, you said that you think it's the other way today, that Harvard and Yale discriminate against Anglo-Saxons.
Well, to the extent that they believe in affirmative action, they would necessarily have to discriminate.
I would like to know what you think changed this attitude from discrimination against blacks and Jews to, in Bill's opinion anyway, the opposite extreme.
May I?
Yes.
I don't see it as a change of attitude. I see it as a change of whose ox is good. And the change is simply a political change in the larger society. It's cheaper for nonprofit organizations to discriminate, no matter who they discriminate against. Therefore, you would expect them to be in the forefront of discrimination, whether it is direct discrimination or reverse discrimination. And that's largely what you find.
Well, you're saying that it was to their advantage to discriminate against blacks and Jews before, and now
no, it was never to their advantage to do so, except insofar as they simply had prejudices, which they were able to indulge. I'm saying that whatever they do, discrimination costs them a lot less than it costs someone in a competitive industry. Highly competitive industries, for example, sports and entertainment, have typically been much more open than much more closed-in kinds of non-competitive things like public utilities and nonprofit organizations, foundations, universities, hospitals, and so on.
What would you do to help those blacks who are still in a very low economic condition in terms of education, for example? How there are, as you said, many blacks today who are still being given totally inadequate education, yes, cannot be expected to get very far for that reason. What would be your remedy for that?
Before they give the remedy, or their suggestion, can you come up with a possible solution that Dr. Sowell may suggest that you previously heard? I know I started this in the middle, but I believe the part I played, he kind of alluded to a solution or at least a remedy, I believe. I'm not going to go back and check, but on your own, see if you can think of something. And here we go.
I know.
That's very easy. I would allow their parents to have a choice of where to send them to school, whether that choice is called a voucher scheme, open enrollment, tuition tax credit, any kind of scheme of that sort that would put that power in the hands of their parents, mainly because that would mean that the schools would have to be responsive to them. As it is now, the school is a monopoly. They need not be responsive. I have relatives right here in New York whom I've had to intervene for because the schools would not even treat them decently, much less give them access to the information they wanted that they were entitled to under the law.
If you put it in the hands of the parents, and the parents are themselves uneducated, mm-hmm, and not really aware of what the various potentials are, what makes you think that they would decide more intelligently than the present system?
I think, again, history. As blacks emerged from slavery, and minute percentage could read or write. And yet in half a century, over half the black population was literate. An economic historian has called that one of the most remarkable things in history. If you look back to the era prior to the Civil War, when there were free blacks, about 500,000 in the United States, they not only were not allowed in the public schools, they were in some states forbidden even to send their children to private schools. They had to do so clandestinely. And yet the census of 1850 showed that most free blacks could read and write. So I don't think that the fact that people have little education means that they are in any way poorer judges than distant bureaucrats who have their own axes to grind and run the public school system.
But you yourself said.
I just thought of something, Booker T. Washington. You guys got to go read his autobiography. And I believe it was in his autobiography where he was saying that people were basically, books were like contraband. And it's such a shame. Is if it wasn't so sad. But the descendants of Booker T. Washington's generation have basically traded the contraband of books, education, for cocaine, heroin, and crack. Just let that sink in, man. It's really sad. Really sad.
That you thought one of the reasons why blacks were still in an underprivileged position, those who still are, was because they had not been given a proper education. Yes. And we are now talking about people who had not been given a proper education, making decisions for their children as to what is a proper education. And you're saying that if that was put up to them, they would make a wiser choice than the present efforts to integrate the schools.
I believe she may have just quoted W.E.B. Du Bois and his, his philosophy about the talented 10th. Basically, only 10% of a population is talented enough to make the decisions for the rest of the population, and that is basically a socialist philosophy, if not communist. And if you don't know who W.E.B. Du Bois is, you were probably asleep during Black History Month or Black Victimization Month, as I call it. But basically, helped found the NAACP. He's a Black leader, hero, whatever you want to call him. But for me, I really admire his educational prowess. The Souls of Black Folks, I've had to read that thing a couple of times just to get through it. I mean, he's a brilliant mind, to say the least. But I highly disagree with a lot of his philosophy. He was a socialist, and he died a communist. I'm pro-capitalist. So although we share the same skin color, the forefathers may have been in chains in this country. We have different philosophies. As a matter of fact, his parents were both free and owned property in, I believe, Massachusetts. You guys can look that up, leave the description below. But yeah, he wasn't descendants of slaves. So both his parents were free. They were property owners in the North. So he didn't have that same experience of Booker T. Washington or Frederick Douglass. Okay, here we go.
Let me say that if they would not make a very different choice, it would be hard to understand the hysterical opposition of teachers' unions to giving them that opportunity.
Well, I have no comment on that, but I would like to know how Bill feels about improving educational opportunities.
I see him getting mad. He keep like, hey, y'all messing with Dr. Sowell now?
I believe with Dr. Sowell that the voucher system obviously encourages parents to use the same kind of selectivity that's available to parents who have enough money to send their children to private schools, and that to give a versatility of choice, a flexibility of choice to parents of poor children, the same versatility that is given to parents of wealthier children is obviously desirable.
And you think that?
Yeah, so how come, like, let's say Nancy Pelosi's kids or Maxine Waters' kids aren't graduating from Compton High? I don't know, maybe they did, but I know the average politician ain't sending their kids to where I went to junior high school in Detroit. I'll just say that.
That their ability to make the decision is equal.
No, but I think it may be equal, maybe less equal, maybe more equal. I think that the phenomenon of the poor and uneducated parent who seeks for his or her children what he himself has never achieved for himself is much more commonplace.
Oh God, yes.
Than the kind of sated, self-satisfied parent who typically neglects the education of his child.
I think you'd have very few blacks who finished college, including myself, if they had to have college-educated parents to send them there. There was no one in my family that went to college before me, and among the blacks that I know of my generation, I would say that's the rule rather than the exception.
My son, the doctor syndrome.
Absolutely.
Well, I think that insofar as your own experience is concerned, you are clearly an exceptional person, and it is somewhat.
I hate that. Oh, you're exceptional. Why? Because I'm not in prison, right? I get that all the time. You know, if I'm not carrying the flag of the Democratic Party or a woe is me narrative, that's why this is called, where is it? Our new narrative, right? If I'm not championing that Black victimization narrative, and, you know, I always get this, oh, you're an exceptional person. Everybody else is still in the projects. Wrong. No, I made choices. I had people who helped me make those choices. Were they exceptional? No, they just made choices, right? I mean, it's just, I really, that's one of my biggest pet peeves is you're exceptional. No, I don't. No, I'm not. Sorry. I can't talk, neither can I spell, right? So it's about the individual and the choices they make. And I'm a part of a group of people called a family. And I should say, fortunate that my parents weren't on crack or heroin. My parents didn't choose to do crack or heroin, right? And therefore, what they did choose to do was raise their son. And they tried to raise him the best way they could. Now, is that exceptional? Do you call white parents who made those same choices exceptional? I don't think so. You just call them white. So what does that mean? Now that means that if my parents made the logical choice to raise their son to gain marketable skills other people are willing to pay for, now I'm white. I'm not Black. I can't stand it, y'all.
Reminiscent of what the Minister for Women's Affairs said in France when she was asked whether there was going to continue to be a Ministry of Women's Affairs now that women had achieved such great strides forward. Her answer was, as long as the average woman does not have the same opportunities as the average man, we need to have a government office which will try to get them some sort of equal opportunity.
But it's precisely the government which is denying it in this case. It's the government which has been running these schools from which the kids graduate semi-literate. And for years, Black parents have been sending their kids, not just me, but a whole generation of Blacks to college, to high school, whatever. If you look at the history of Black education in the United States, that has been largely, at the beginning, an effort by the Blacks themselves. It was 1916 before there were as many Blacks attending public high school as were attending private high schools. So there's a very long history of Blacks trying to get their kids educated. I might say from my experience, again, not my own story, but at Black colleges, the parents who work nights and fathers drive cabs and mothers who scrub floors to see that their kid gets an education. If there weren't such people, you wouldn't see half as many Blacks with college degrees today.
And they're beating down the doors of Catholic parochial schools, even non-Catholic Blacks, to get in there.
Yes.
What percentage would you say of the total number of Blacks were in private schools or beating down the doors of parochial schools? Would it not be a considerably less than half percentage?
That's right, because they don't have the money. And you could have made exactly the same argument against the GI Bill. That why should you have a GI Bill for people to go to college when only the rich go to college? Well, the reason the rich were the only ones going to college at that time was because there was no GI Bill. The whole point of this is to put this choice within their hands. It is hard for me to understand what harm is going to be done by allowing parents to have a choice as compared to having self-interested bureaucrats have a monopoly.
Well, I think that your notion of parents having a choice overlooks the tremendous degree of family disorientation which exists in all communities, including the Black community.
Single mother families, a single mother has the same incentive to send her kid to the best school she can get him into as any other parent.
There are, of course, many children, particularly of high school age, who are totally disassociated from their parents.
That's true. I think that would be a considerably less than half, too, to use your phrase.
I would like to, for a moment, ask you some questions about the economics of job getting in terms of the blacks versus the whites. The statistics I was able to pull together indicate that at the present time, white males make $17,427 on an average basis for the year. Black males make $12,738. White females make $10,244. And black females make $9,476. It is.
I'm gonna point this out, and I'm not gonna go deep into it, but this is 1981, and the average male salary was $17,000, and in 1981, there was considerably more women living at home helping to raise their family. Was this some nefarious scheme by men to keep women down and in the kitchen? I don't know. I'm not a woman. I don't think so. I think that's just how things were. People valued the mother as a mother more back then. And today, I believe people value women as workers more. But I digress. My point is, look how far the purchasing power of the dollar has gone. I know it's kind of off to the right here, but I think keep that in mind, because it's all tied to money. All of this stuff is tied to money. So back in 81, you could probably earn $17,000 a year and have a wife at home with a kid. Today, the average salary is like 40-something thousand, maybe. And can you afford to raise a kid and have your wife stay at home, or your partner, same-sex couple, whatever? Can you live off of one income on $41,000? Not in most places, not very comfortably. Okay, let's go back.
Clear from these figures, as indeed I think it's clear to most of us from what we see, that there is a discrimination against blacks and against women in our present system. Since not all blacks will be superior, how would you try to even that out so that there would be some equality of job opportunities?
Yeah, I'm sorry you missed the earlier part of the program when I pointed out that where you find people not represented evenly, that does not show the institutional effect, because almost nowhere in human affairs do you find people evenly represented. If you compare comparable people with respect to age, with respect to education, etc., you get a totally different picture, both with respect to blacks and women. Now, the figures that I saw, for example, showed more recently that if you take black families where the husband and wife are both college educated and compare them to a white family where the husband and wife are both college educated, the black family is now earning $2,000 a year more. The problem is that very few blacks fall in that category. That when you compare category for category, then we're talking about getting people a decent education. I'm saying that you cannot say that numbers collected at the employer's place of business reflect simply the employer's policies. Those numbers reflect underlying conditions in the whole society, just as numbers collected at the hospital do not show you that the people are sick because they're in the hospital.
No, I would agree with that, but you would also have to agree that generally speaking, women are paid less, for example, for the same jobs as men.
No, I would not. I would not agree with that. If you're talking about women with the same number of years of experience, with the same continuous service, et cetera, then when I look at that, I don't find that disparity. I find, for example, in many cases, that women are making more, depending on how you break the data down. The difference with women is between married women and everybody else. That's the real difference.
Well,
Now, I had a conversation the other day about this with a good friend of mine, and I thought of something after the conversation was over. I wish I brought it up. So I'm bringing it up now with you guys. So she brought up the fact that Salesforce, the company Salesforce, their CEO, found that there was a disparity in the wages of men and women doing the same jobs. And I threw up the old, Thomas Sowell come back of, well, maybe some of these women didn't continue from high school through college on through their professional career. Maybe some of them got married, some of them took a break to have a child or something like that. And my friend gave a very good rebuttal in that she said, well, most women, if they have a kid, they're only off for like 3 or 4 months. And I'm like, yeah, that's true. And then we got off on another subject. But what I failed to mention is this: as a recruiter, and in legal and in tech, if you have two similarly situated people, as Dr. Sowell is alluding to, a man and a woman, and if they both have a computer science degree from like, let's say MIT or Berkeley or something like that, right? Well, statistics show that woman is going to be more sought after, and will likely be earning more money. But when it came to the Salesforce thing, and the CEO found the discrepancy, and after he found the discrepancy, he made sure he gave equal pay across the board for men and women doing the same job. Now, what I want to put out there is this: if you're a woman doing the same job as a man, but you're making less, how, I guess, marketable were you as an employee versus that man? Meaning, if you got a degree in English and you're working at Salesforce doing analytics, some type of analyst job, right? Or sales job or whatever. And if you're a male and you went to, let's say, Michigan University, and you're a female and you went to Chico State University, right? Well, the HR department, if they know anything, I'm sure they do, since Salesforce is a huge corporation, they're going to find more value in the degree from the University of Michigan than Chico State in general, right? And so how do you get to the point where you have this man and this woman both doing analytics, but this man is, or whatever job, this man is making more money? Well, he may start off making more money because the HR department wanted more people from higher ranked educational institutions than lower ranked educational institutions. This is absolutely true in recruiting, right? If I come across a resume with U of M, I'm saying U of M, I'm from Michigan, Harvard, Yale, Columbia, right? I don't care whose name is on top of that. I'm looking at the skill set, what they, where they got the degree from, what the degree is, and job experience, right? And there are a lot of reasons why men enter the workforce and are more marketable than women is this simple thing, right? Now, I haven't done any research on this. This is just coming from a guy you don't know. How many of you guys out there with sons and daughters tell the son and daughter, or who were as children, were told this: look, Mary, you have to get the best education you possibly can so that you can one day marry a man and support him while he stays at home and you go to work, right? So just from being inside the house, the priorities are different. Now, today, you will be silly not to tell Mary, look, Mary, you may have to support your husband, so you need to get the best education possible, right? But in the 70s, in the 50s, in the 40s, no parents, with very few parents, I don't know of any parents who told their daughters that, look, you got to get the best education you possibly can so that you can attract a man and have that security for that man while he stays at home and raises children. Just the starting point is different. It's not necessarily nefarious, there's some evil out there. Just the starting points are different. I'll let them finish.
And as to single women, the Census Bureau statistics, the most recent ones I could find, 1978, say that single men are earning $11,100 and single women are earning $9,300.
Yes, I love the word single that is used. When I did my study, I didn't use single, I used never married. You see, a woman who is single at age 40, having spent 10 or 20 years raising children, is really not quite the same as a man of age 40 who's been working continuously for 20 years.
And the differential she cited is not that great, so it could easily be accounted for by the
Yes, because when I break them down the other way, I did this for the academic world, and there I found the women who are never married, which is the term the way I take it. There they were earning more than the men. And similarly, when the government did data some years ago on women who had been working continuously since high school into their 30s, there you found that they were making slightly more than men of the same description. So the difference is between married women and everybody else. And married men get an extra bonus because their wives take care of many things that enable them to put more time into their careers.
I'm sure you're aware of the fact that there are approximately 15% of all homes in which there is only one wage earner. So that when you talk about women being able to take care of things for their married mate wage earner, the fact is that in the overwhelming majority of American homes, the women also work. And therefore, I don't think your explanation that women have other responsibilities and that that's why they are...
Work can mean part-time work or full-time work. Women do not work full-time to the same extent that men. Part-time workers make less than full-time workers.
May I ask a question about unemployment?
I guess she ain't like that, so she just moves on. And is this a time to ask, is this mansplaining? I don't know. Let me know in the comments.
The latest figures I saw indicated that of Black youth, something like 46% of those who wanted jobs were unable to get jobs. I really would like this time to ask both of you to respond to what would you do in that situation? If you would assume for a moment that these are people who do want jobs and are unable to find work.
I would, first of all, repeal the minimum wage law, because if you go back to, say, 1950, 1948, 49, 50, you find that at that time, the unemployment rate among Black teenagers was a fraction of what it is today. And there certainly wasn't any less racism then than there is today. What was different was that at that time, the minimum wage law was a decade old. It was a decade of inflation, and the law hadn't been changed. So for all practical purposes, it didn't exist.
Don't you think that was also a decade of expansion in which there were a lot of jobs, whereas today our economy is in a recession and there are not that many jobs
If you look
available.
at the most prosperous years of the 60s and 70s, you don't find Black teenage unemployment as low as it was in the recession year of 1949.
Well, I don't know what the job situation was then, but it's only recently that we have reached
I was
the
a
point.
Black teenager in 1949.
Did you get a job?
It was a recession year, and after a considerable looking, I found a job. But the point is, the kid who was living where I lived then, who's living there now, he has a hell of a lot harder time finding that job because there are so many good people who try to do good for him and priced him right out of the market.
Well, facing the situation as it presently exists.
And you guys need to go look up the Davis-Bacon Act. And if you can get your hands on the congressional record where they were going back and forth as to why this act should be enacted, which is basically the federal minimum wage law. You want to talk about systematic racism, because this was in the 30s, Jim Crow era. They were blatant about it. Look, these northern business owners are going down to the South, getting cheap Black labor, bringing them up to the North and underbidding us in government contracts. We want a minimum wage law so that if you have to pay a contractor $1, we're hoping that the prejudice that they have against the Blacks will force them to hire white people. And guess who's the champion of the minimum wage? Black community.
What would you do for that 46%?
If the situation is going to remain as it presently exists, the results will remain as it presently exists.
No, I'm saying now, today, what would you do to help this 46%?
I would repeal those things.
But that isn't going to help these 46%, is it?
Nothing.
Do you want
to change it or you want to leave it the same? If you want to leave it the same, everything will continue the same. If you want to change it, it'll change.
No, I think that your suggestions of change contemplate that in the future, the situation will be different. But I'm asking you about the 46% of Black youths who are now unemployed, who probably would not be affected by changing the law this year.
You can say that all you want, but the evidence is totally against you.
May I add to this datum, just out of respect to Mr. George Keller?
Another thing, sorry, but I got to bring this up. Repealing the federal minimum wage, a lot of arguments against that is that, employers would take advantage of employees and pay them 50 cents. So now they're trying to get a minimum wage here in California of $15 an hour at some point. And so if you work, let's say you're a McDonald's on 8th Street, and you're offering $15 an hour. And then you open up another McDonald's on B Street, not you, but somebody else, your competitor, opens up a Wendy's. And he's like, look, man, I ain't $15 an hour. Man, I'm paying $1 an hour. Who's going to work for you at $1 an hour when someone's paying $15 an hour? Nobody. And the person who is currently, let's say they're doing a job and they're only making $5 an hour, right? Is this person going to say, hey, I'm making $5 an hour. Now's the time to get married and start a family on $5 an hour? Who's going to do that? Nobody. So you get in, especially if you're a teenager, instead of shooting up Chicago, maybe you can get a job making $5, $8 an hour, work that job for a summer, come back the next summer. Now you're making $10 an hour. It ain't about your ability to make money, to purchase, to consume material goods. It's about getting a job to build character, to build responsibility, to learn what it means to show up on time and things like that. And it's like you can say a paid internship. Now, if you are able to get rid of this minimum wage, all this unemployment amongst Black teens and brown teens and even white teens and Asian teens, it automatically goes down. As a business owner, you would love to hire somebody below the minimum wage so that they can at least just show up and learn what it is to work, to be responsible. But why do you want to pay somebody $15 an hour when their productivity level is $4 an hour? Dependence.
Who was the assistant to the president of the University of Maryland, who writes in the New York Times, 28 January 1981, quote, in fact, overwhelming numbers of young Blacks are in high school, college, at work, in the military, or at home taking care of babies. The percentage of Blacks between 16 and 19 looking for a full-time job and unable to find one is actually 7.8%.
Well, I can't just resolve, perhaps
according to calculations based on the Bureau of Labor Statistics data.
A similar figure was printed some years ago in Wattenberg's book, The Real America. A lot of those big numbers come from looking at kids who would like to have a job after school, which is fine, and I think it'd be better if they had more jobs after school. But those numbers don't relate to what we're talking about when we talk about adult unemployment.
Well, what would you say about the present 8% overall unemployment figure? That also is a lot of people who are looking for part-time jobs, or is that a general figure that indicates that we have a great many unemployed in this country?
There are a great many unemployed. One of the reasons being that we've had the kind of economy we've had for some time now, and all attempts to get the inflation out of it are likely to have these adverse effects. It's tragic.
Should we warn her that you wrote a book about Sayers law?
Well, no.
No, I am concerned about what we do for people who are presently in a very disadvantaged position because of what's happened.
We try to remove as many of the barriers as possible that have put them in that position.
And you think the barriers that have put them in that position are, for example, a minimum wage law?
Minimum wage laws, labor unions, occupational licensing.
Would you abolish labor unions?
Huh?
Would you abolish labor unions?
You don't have to abolish labor unions. I'm saying that if you're asking me, what are some of the things that have done it? I'm giving you some of the things that have done it. Blacks were well represented in many occupations, skilled occupations in the South 2 or 3 generations ago to a greater extent than today, because 2 or 3 generations ago, those industries were not unionized. Construction, railroads, just classic examples. When we have this so-called Philadelphia plans to get Blacks into the construction industry, I mean, it would be laughable if it weren't so tragic. Blacks were heavily into the construction industry before it was unionized.
Well, again, I come back to the here and now. Assuming that they are not heavily in the construction industry now, what would you do to cure it? Because I do think
I would do away with or otherwise mitigate the effects of those things that are keeping Blacks out of those industries.
Forgive me, but he has said that 3 times.
Well, he has not taken up the cause of those people who would not be immediately affected by changing those laws. In addition to
the acoustics must be very bad in here.
He can't create, as he's elsewhere pointed out, to say that somebody should receive more money than he is now making and to pass a law to that effect is not, in fact, to give him a job for more money. It may very well be to cause unemployment.
I gather that there are many instances where the minimum wage provisions have been waived or do not apply, where the employers have nonetheless not taken advantage of it. So I don't know what empirical...
I'm not sure of that at all. I know that there are provisions of the law under which, if you're willing to go through enough red tape, you can get certain exemptions. Particularly for the person who's hiring 1 or 2 people, he may decide that it's just not worth his while.
Would it be your feeling that if all the affirmative action programs were discontinued, women and minorities would go ahead much faster than they have under the affirmative action program?
Yes, it's not my opinion. The data indicate that, for example, Puerto Ricans had a higher percentage of the national average income before quotas than after. So did Mexican Americans. Blacks are about the same. So there's a marvelous putting of the burden on other people. You're saying here's this massive program that has existed now for a decade, and you're unable to show me the benefits that have come from all this enormous controversy.
Well, it certainly has been a revolution insofar as women's participation in the labor force.
Not really. No, it hasn't. No,
I know that of my own knowledge.
No, you don't know it of your own knowledge, because I've also looked at the same thing. And in the past, you found women overrepresented in many professional occupations, much more so than today. And you find that decline in those occupations much more highly correlated with a lower age of marriage for college women and with more childbearing. And as those two demographic factors have changed, women have also changed in their representation. So there's this whole myth that's been created that this is all a function of political developments of the past decade or so, just will not stand up.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Pilpin.
Yeah, I want to say this too about affirmative action. In Thomas Sowell's autobiography, a little book, go read it. It's really interesting. But he was a professor at Cornell, amongst other places, and he had a very interesting take on affirmative action, which is that he noticed that a lot of the blacks who were coming in would have done very well at other institutions. Like, so the example, a real black and white, no pun intended, example would be if he was teaching at MIT, right? And you're teaching math at MIT. Well, MIT teaches at the 98th percentile, and affirmative action may allow a black person who scores in the 94th percentile to enter MIT. Well, if you took the same black person and sent him to the University of Michigan, he'll probably get straight A's, feel like a superstar on graduation, right? Start a business and become very successful. You send that same guy to MIT who is basically at the 94th percentile, but he's in a class where they teach at the 98th percentile. You're setting this otherwise successful black person up for failure. And he has statistics and cases that show a lot of affirmative action has done a lot more harm than actual good. And if you want to know how necessary affirmative action is, you had people going, I always say this, his name was Malcolm, I should remember his name, but the first black attorney came around in 1831. This is well before the Civil War. He became a federal magistrate, which means he had clients. Remember, American history, America is all racism. You know, yesteryear was all about racism. Well, how did this attorney get clients in this racist world? Okay, well, we're about finishing up here.
Well, and thank you very much, Dr. Thomas Sowell, author of Ethnic America, A History, and Markets and Minorities. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay, we'll end it today. Yeah, if you're stuck around this long, please like, share, and subscribe. Emphasis on the share part, because algorithms don't tend to like a positive narrative to help motivate people. And I don't want people to think that I'm just this pro-black guy. I'm pro-capitalist, black, white, Asian, straight, gay, religious, atheist. Capitalism has a lot to offer. free markets have a lot to offer to everybody, and I think it's dying away. So before we throw this country called America in the garbage, I think we need to know exactly what we're throwing away. And one day I'm gonna do a video on what really made America unique. But with that said, I'm gonna ask again, like, share, and subscribe. Let me know what you think below. And let me know if you guys know what this is. Taggart, Transcontinental Railroad. I would love to hear. With that, have a great day and stay safe out there.